some big free speech stories here. Major news networks are reportedly sidelining Palestinian analysts and reporters amid the eruption of violence in the Middle East. CBS News streaming reportedly intervened to pull a clip of human rights attorney Noura Erakat, and two Palestinian analysts allegedly had CNN appearances canceled after describing what they plan to say on the Israel-Hamas war. And the backlash doesn't stop there. Model Gigi Hadid posted her take on the Israel-Hamas war online last week, and now she's receiving death threats. Hadid wrote in an Instagram post last week, "I have deep empathy for the heartbreak for the Palestinian struggle and life under occupation. It's a responsibility I hold daily. I also feel a responsibility to my Jewish friends to make it clear, as I have before, while I have hopes and dreams for Palestinians, none of them include the harm of a Jewish person. The terrorizing of innocent people is not in alignment with and does not do any good for the Free Palestine movement."
Hadid also posted a photo this past week that read, "There's nothing Jewish about the Israeli government's treatment of Palestinians. Condemning the Israeli government is not anti-Semitic, and supporting Palestinians is not supporting Hamas." Following that post, Hadid found herself in the crosshairs of the State of Israel's Instagram account, reposting a version of the infographic Hadid shared, but changing the original words, and that account wrote, "There's nothing valiant about Hamas's massacre of Israelis. Condemning Hamas for what it is not anti-Palestine."
Now, since this, the entire Hadid family have reportedly been receiving ominous messages that make them fear for their lives via email, social media, and their phone numbers that were allegedly leaked. Okay, so what is interesting about the response is that, one, it's the State of Israel's official social media account that is picking fights with random Palestinian American social media figures, models, people who aren't familiar with the Hadid sisters, that came to prominence because they're in the world of these kind of influencers. Their mother was a real housewife. Their father is Palestinian. They cavorted around with the Kardashians and things like that.
I had the vaguest idea of who this was when you suggested we talk about it.
I will say that. One of them was married to a One Direction boy, all of those kinds of things. But they are, I think, some of the more notable Palestinian Americans around. They have always been passionate about Palestine. But as you could see in the initial response that they wrote, they were unequivocal about condemning Hamas.
Yeah, I don't object to this statement whatsoever. The statement seems fine.
That's what's so odd about the response. Not only that it's like the Israeli state
that would be
media
inappropriate.
Account, but then also that the state media account seemed to completely ignore what she had actually said and tried to imply, very strongly implied, that she was in any way endorsing Hamas or indifferent to the tragedy that befell those 1,300 odd Jewish people on October 7th, Israelis on October 7th.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's important. And again, speaks to what the line we're trying to draw, which is that Hamas is not synonymous with all Palestinians or all of Palestine, but is a separate terror group among whose victims are the innocent Palestinians in the region. So I don't see any problem with what she said, and I don't know why the Israeli government had to get involved. And I do want to more broadly caution organizations and entities, and especially governments, but really everyone, as we've talked about earlier, this kind of cancel culture stuff. Certainly, we can't violate anybody's First Amendment free speech rights. People have the right to protest. People have the right to say things that you or I might think are idiotic, but they have the right to do it. It's our most cherished and beloved right. We've had Michael Schellenberger on the show a couple times this week to talk about that, to talk about what's going on in other countries where they don't have First Amendment rights. They should. They don't. Their free speech rights are being very blatantly violated in the UK, in Germany,
in France.
Yeah.
A woman, I think it was in France, said that she was arrested after she, said like Bismillah, some like basic Arabic like greeting to another person. There was that Suella Braverman, is that her name? The UK official who advised that it might not be appropriate, legal, to carry a Palestinian flag. And there were a string of arrests that were caught on video in the UK after she made that proclamation. France tried to outlaw Palestinian, anything pro-Palestine, and the French weren't having it. You know how the French do. They've been in the streets in throngs, and I don't know how well they're going to be able to enforce anything like that.
We're so used to our First Amendment norms, and they're fairly robustly protected. They've been litigated at the Supreme Court so many times, and they're among are kind of less contested. They're among our most clear, I think, broadly established rights. Obviously, there's still a lot of First Amendment cases all the time, but everybody really gets that, sorry, you just can't arrest someone for burning the American flag.
Yeah.
And if you try, you're going to get, eventually the court's going to say you absolutely can't do that, and there's going to be a massive judgment. So we get that in America. So they don't have that in Europe.
In fact, in France, the French Council of State yesterday rejected an appeal on its ban of pro-Palestine protests. They say the top court in France says that France's pro-Palestine protest ban is okay. And again, I think Glenn raised this point when he was on the other day, or maybe it was when I was talking to him last night on his show. He pointed out, even if you believe that it was okay to ban protests because you think that it's inciting violence and there's a state interest in doing so, it is very telling that pro-Israel protests are not being banned. Can you imagine, many people were putting forward this hypothetical last week when the news was that 3 prominent hosts at MSNBC seemed to be pulled from their hosting responsibilities, Mehdi Hassan, Ali Velshir, and I forget the last person's name, and they were doing the thought experiment. Can you imagine if a station's only 3 Jewish hosts were being pulled from the air at this time in this crisis because of some perception of bias? People would be outraged, and rightly so. So I do think that the Gigi Hadid example is particularly pernicious, 1, because it is the state of Israel's own account, and 2, because I think it's reflective of a broader kind of investment that Israel has had in having a lot of control over messaging about Israel for years. The AIPAC PAC is, if not the biggest, one of the biggest PACs that exist in the United States. That's the Israel PAC. And you can see from the behavior of a number of elected officials how reluctant they are to go against it. Bernie Sanders, who of course is Jewish himself, his entire family outside of his parents was wiped out in the Holocaust, got targeted by a large amount of AIPAC money after he won, I think it was the Nevada race, a disproportionate amount of spending that seemed to pay off. And why? Well, Bernie Sanders had some mild, frankly, in the grand scheme of things, criticism of the oppression of Palestinians. But that has largely been not allowed in the public discourse until now, and I think we're seeing this play out as we head into week 2 of the wake of the tragedy on October 7th. Yeah,
there have been too many in the American context. There have been too many, I think, calls for blacklisting and not calls for. Well, maybe there have been some calls for, but not serious efforts to violate in a very direct way the First Amendment rights, but we believe in a culture of free speech as well. I've criticized efforts to, broadly get fired or expelled or unpersoned or whatever people who make maybe regrettable, maybe not, political statements or jokes or things when they're young, all that kind of stuff. So in that same vein, I really think we ought to be a lot more careful, and people should not have such a knee-jerk like, oh, who do you work for? I'm gonna stop you. Right now, we're doing there's a lot going on with donors to universities are rescinding or threatening that they're going to rescind their donations to universities over perception. Well, it's happening in a lot of other places too. Penn State, I think, some maybe Columbia, a couple other places. And look, again, no one is obligated to donate to any cause that they don't. Probably what I would say to a lot of these wealthy philanthropists is this the first time you're realizing that the institution or the students there have values you don't agree with or don't align with? It's
not
just
about
now.
That. It's not about that. I think it's about sending a very strong message that certain kind of speech is not going to be tolerated. And I do think there's a power differential here. I wouldn't advise, if I had a child or was mentoring a young person, that they want to shut down debate on their campus. I wouldn't advise it, but I also don't think a kid having an opinion about a speaker is as significant or powerful as a multi-million-dollar donor to the university trying to coerce what the university does by withdrawing its donations. It's their right, but what should be more concerning for the public interest? One other example that we haven't raised yet is a professor at Berkeley, a University of California, which is supposed to be this progressive bastion, just was allowed to write an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal saying, "Don't hire my anti-Semitic law students."
Yeah, I saw that.
That is.
Well, I mean, the professor has the right to say that.
Yeah, but who is getting the right to write these articles in the Wall Street Journal? This was an issue with Emma Camp as well when people were criticizing what was going on there. It does seem that repeatedly the people with the more conservative position are allowed these huge and powerful forums to make their speech known and let their voices be heard. while at the same time saying, "Oh, I'm the small boy. I'm the victim in this scenario." I have yet to see any pro-Palestinian law professors or anybody else get these same opportunities, and I'm not seeing pro-Palestinian mega donors saying we're going to bring Harvard to its knees by withdrawing our multi-million-dollar corporations. Or any banks. Remember what happened to Kanye West, who was anti-Semitic, to be clear, but J.P. Morgan making the choice to terminate that banking relationship? But not Epstein's banking relationship?
I've seen pro-Palestinian commentary make its way. I would broadly say, you brought up my colleague Emma Camp. I mean, she was speaking about not specifically the Israel-Palestine issue. The campuses are maybe not respectful enough or platforming enough for your viewpoint, like explicitly left opinion, but they are hotbeds of generally liberal and progressive places, right? Conservative students are outnumbered wildly on elite campuses. The campuses give like 99.9% of their donations to the Democratic Party. The faculty do.
Robby,
so let's not overemphasize.
It's a meritocracy. It seems to me that conservatives need to just be getting better test scores, and then maybe there would be more of them in Harvard.
Well, fortunately, the test scores are not the only things that get taken into consideration.
You're right.
In some of these
Legacy is 30% of Harvard's
I think there are a few other factors there, but we'll leave it there. More Rising right after this.